Chapter 1. The Shutdown.
Over the course of the first week and a half of March 2020, the coronavirus started to spread in the U.S. Slightly before then, countries abroad underwent shutdowns, but life was still normal in the United States. COVID got a few mentions and stories, but it wasn't a dominating presence on the newswires until late in the day on Wednesday, March 11th, 2020, when this happened.
Tonight, the NBA is suspending its entire season. The owners talked tonight and had put out a plan ready to go in place to close off games to the public. Then Jazz center Rudy Gobert tested positive for COVID-19.
Game tonight has been postponed. You're all safe.
The COVID-19 virus is making its presence felt in Hollywood as well. American actor Tom Hanks and his wife Rita Wilson have become the first celebrities to be diagnosed with the virus.
I think that was the night where everybody felt as though it had become real, and it was really the true start. Because before that, there was a lot of speculation. There was a lot of, what do you cancel? Is it going to be an NCAA tournament game, an NCAA tournament conference tournament? Is it going to be the entire tournament altogether? But when the NBA had that moment, it really did feel like complete shutdown mode.
That was SiriusXM's Damon Amendolara. Gobert and Hanks' positive tests sent serious shockwaves across the United States. Over the next few days, schools went online, entire sports seasons were suspended or just canceled, and so many of life's major milestones such as weddings, graduations, and far too many funerals became an afterthought. But essential businesses remained open in person, including local television stations. The daily grind of seeking truths remained the same. Get the stories on television at showtime. But the content shifted drastically even before things got serious. CNY Central's Tommy Sladek recalls the days leading up to the pandemic.
First, remember the first case of the coronavirus hitting Onondaga County. I remember there being a press conference. I remember the mayor, the county executive, the health commissioner, all being up there basically shoulder to shoulder. And boy, did that change within a week when we learned how this thing spread.
And boy, did it spread quickly. As cases continued to grow exponentially across the country and around the world, things began to shut down. CNN had to break news that would almost force people to stay at home.
The breaking news, stay at home. That is the order tonight from 4 state governors as the coronavirus pandemic spreads. New York, California, Illinois, and Connecticut all ordering non-essential employees to stay home. Those orders cover 75 million people across the United States. New York's governor today telling non-essential businesses in his state to reduce their workforce to 0.
We quickly had to adapt to a new lifestyle, and nurses, custodians, and grocery clerks became the most important people on earth at great personal risk. They weren't just any workers anymore. They were essential workers. Reporters were also considered essential workers, and they had to change the way they do things and be prepared to be questioned.
And so the first thing was going up to my boss's office and him saying, grab what you can out of your office, you're going home, and I don't know when you're coming back. And I did not see the inside of this building for another 6 months. We had to drive around with these papers that were essentially these, essential worker verification forms that we literally kept in our glove box in case we got pulled over. Should they get to the point where they would be almost doing checkpoints, asking people, why are you out on the road?
There were good reasons for those measures Sladek discussed. More and more people tested positive by the day, and the death toll rose continuously. In the midst of a pandemic, it's all natural to be doom and gloom, but when you're listening to sports talk radio, which is built off having energy and personality, how do you adjust?
You certainly don't want to go on the radio and just project overall fear and terror, but you do want to approach it with seriousness. And so I think the next day was trying to be as authentic as possible, but being responsible as possible as well, but authentic to the question, the central question that everybody was dealing with, which is what happens now, and be open about asking, I don't know what happens now. Here's some of my theories. Here's how I feel, but I don't have the answers because nobody really had the answers right then.
And it wasn't just talk radio in the case of Amendolara, an NYC resident. Outlets that typically cover the biggest games in the country had to adjust, and adjust quickly. ESPN talk show First Take conveyed the seriousness of the matter as well.
My reaction when I heard the news from the NBA was, of course, Adam Silver is out in front of it. just as he was when Donald Sterling made those despicable remarks. He got rid of them, just as he was when China tried to dictate speech policy to the NBA. He stood up. And I'm not claiming that's the first thing he did, right? Because, of course, every business tries to protect its bottom line. So the first thing you do is not cancel everything and give back all the money. It's the last thing you want to do.
That was analyst Max Kellerman, and for as much talk as there was about wanting to resume games, save money, and crown a champion, health and safety was the bottom line. We didn't get any definitive answers on how professional sports would operate, more on that later, until June, but that was the shutdown. For some journalists, the impact of the pandemic was felt on a local and national level. Like CBS News White House correspondent Scott MacFarlane, it was still go, go, go with his storytelling.
We're kind of in a profession where you can't let that happen, where you have to be moving, you have to be active, you have to be out there. So I didn't really know what the hell I was going to do, because you still got to cover news. You still have to you have to tell people what the hell's going on while you're locked down.
And how do you still cover the news, tell people what's going on, and why you're locked down? One of the fundamental aspects of the pandemic rang even more true for journalists: staying connected. While people did just that to try and eliminate a feeling of isolation or have some form of fun in some way, it was essential for MacFarlane to properly do his job. Focus on that last line. Properly do his job.
One thing that I found helpful was the idea that you have to develop sources before you need them. You have to have relationships before you need them. And that's one of those moments where that comes in pretty handy, because you need to be able to reach out to somebody remotely and get the same type of information and impact that you would normally need an in-person visit to get.
Now focus on that last line MacFarlane said, more specifically his shoe leather journalism, meaning the importance of him seeing his interview subjects in person. Interviews over Skype was a relatively common practice before the pandemic, and doing so came with some extra setup. The far simpler Zoom app rose to prominence thanks to COVID, and it has greatly changed things. For example, here in Syracuse, if I wanted to cover a story in Utica, I no longer have to drive 45 minutes to talk to people. Zoom gave us that alternative. Does that potentially detract from the art of journalism? Journalists are always adapting to the latest technology and communicating. Another element of adapting, the timing of it all. Journalists tend to run on pretty tight deadlines, and ironically, those deadlines got even tighter when doing work from home.
Normally, the deadline where, say I was doing a live shot downtown, right? And luckily we're on James Street, so we're not that far away. As long as I had my package and my scripts and CGs in by 4:30, I was fine. But when the pandemic happened, because we were going through the laptops, the download speed, working with the editors, 4 o'clock at the minimum, even if I was going 10 minutes away, had to be the new goal. And so that changed where everything was sped up. Your day maybe earlier, you didn't have to go out and shoot much, but you had to have your stuff in.
It all started when two very well-known figures tested positive, and journalists were there covering it immediately. Journalists' work went from primarily in person to staying home and gathering information on Zoom or Skype calls. They still had that essential workers tag, literally and figuratively, enabling them to still do their work. That work had a different look from medium to medium, with everyone wanting to convey the seriousness of the issue in their own unique way. Now, the work was still high-paced and action-packed, but it did not look the same. And in many ways, it hasn't looked the same since. That was the shutdown. The immediate moments before, during, and after the world changed, including virtually every occupation, and journalism was no exception. But once we started settling into this pandemic life, how did journalists carry out the fundamental aspect of their work? Truthful storytelling.